Phoebe and Ari, those were exceptional divrei Torah, both of you. Ari, you masterfully described the rabbinic understanding of tzaraat, which they saw as a physical manifestation of spiritual decay that had to do with language, with the distortion of the human power of speech. Speech, which can be used for connecting us to one another for the purpose of collective learning and development, as you taught, can also be used to break our bonds with each other and to do harm. You pointed out that the Torah did not see human bodies as distinct or separated from a larger system that included houses and clothing. In other words, suffering in the human body is not a phenomenon isolated to that body, but a reflection of something wrong in the larger environment, in particular, in this case, the misuse of words. You spoke about this on the very week when Fox News settled with Dominion Voting Systems, a trial that confirmed that the network and its anchors intentionally lied over and over and over again that the 2020 election was stolen. It is now proven that they knew it was false, yet 40% of Americans still believe that lie. And Phoebe, putting aside for now the question of women's inherent superiority and godliness and ultimate domination of the human species, you showed us how very similar our own times are to those of our biblical ancestors as it relates to men's persistent attempts to control women's bodies. Using words like impure, sin, and demon, men of the time of the Torah and the Talmud made people believe that women in their reproductive power were a threat to themselves, to men, to the sanctuary, to the whole society, even to God. You spoke about this on the very week when we all held our breath about whether the United States Supreme Court would ban medication abortion across the country, pills that enable women to make decisions about our own bodies and end our own pregnancies. Taking your two arguments together, Ari and Phoebe, what we have here is the relationship between words and bodies. Now, if it were only the case that when the anchors of Fox News told their 100th lie, say, that they would break out in white and red scaly afflictions of tzaraat, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, that rabbinic fantasy is not how it works, at least in our world today. Instead, what happens is that the lies that are told frequently and with impunity do harm and endanger bodies, but not usually the body of the person telling the lie, instead the body of the person about whom the lie is told. We know too well that lies endanger Jewish bodies. We know that anti-Jewish ideas are on the rise in this country. According to the ADL, 85% of Americans believe at least one anti-Jewish trope, up from 61% 3 years ago. This week on Yom HaShoah, we remembered 6 million of our people who were murdered because of anti-Jewish lies. This week, members of Congress said that New York City had been through Sorosization, a lie that our whole city is under the thrall and threat of a wealthy Jew. And this week at CBE, we had to take anti-Jewish graffiti off of the doors of this sanctuary. Lies endanger Jewish bodies. We know, too, that lies endanger Black bodies. Another form of lying, as you told us, Ari, is hiding the truth. The 1619 Project, which documents the history of Black people in America, including the history and legacy of slavery, has been banned in multiple states and school districts. The Color Purple by Alice Walker, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, books about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, about the history of racist policies and ideas, banned. It remains true in 2023 that if you are Black, you are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by the police than if you are white. And if you are Black, you are twice as likely to live in hunger and twice as likely to live in poverty in America. Yet in some states and school districts, you are not allowed to learn why. This week, 16-year-old Ralph Yarl is beginning a long recovery from having been shot in his head and his arm for ringing the wrong doorbell. Andrew Lester had been watching Fox News around the clock, which, according to his son, radicalized him and made him racist. Sure, he was already racist, like we all are, but Fox News affected him. After Andrew Lester shot him, Ralph ran bleeding from his head to 3 neighbors, frantically asking for help. At the 3rd neighbor, he was told to lie on the ground with his hands in the air as if he was a criminal. He did as he was asked, and then he passed out on the ground. And thank God he was eventually taken to a hospital. It is amazing that he is alive. Lies endanger Black bodies. We know that lies endanger trans bodies. This year, there are almost 500 pieces of legislation against transgender and non-binary people being considered in 49 states. These laws are based on lies, like the lie that being trans is contagious, that you can catch it from the people around you or be converted by the people around you. This is a very familiar lie from at least 30 or 40 years ago about lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. And as the New York Times just reported this week, that is not an accident. When the Supreme Court decided that same-sex marriage was a constitutional right 8 years ago, the right wing lost one of their most effective causes to mobilize their base, so they had to find something else. And Terry Schilling, the president of American Principles Project, admitted in the Times, "We knew we needed to find an issue that candidates were comfortable talking about. We threw everything at the wall." And they landed on anti-trans because they could frame it as, quote, protecting the children. The lies they're using to win elections are killing trans children. According to the Trevor Project, more than 50% of trans and non-binary youth considered suicide in 2022. Lies endanger trans bodies. And finally, Phoebe, you showed us that women are punished for having babies and women are punished for not having babies. And let's look at the lies in the anti-abortion movement. In 1973, when the Supreme Court made abortion legal with Roe versus Wade, Republicans and Democrats were equally likely to say that abortion should be legal. The Southern Baptist Convention, in fact, said that abortion should be legal. But because they were worried about court rulings that limited public prayer, evangelical churches decided they wanted to get involved in politics, and conservative activists like Phyllis Schlafly saw abortion as an issue that could mobilize their base. But they did not originally talk about a fetus as a baby. No, they originally talked about abortion as a threat to the traditional family, along with gay rights and women working outside of the home. Only later did they start using words like pro-life and babies and partial birth. Mike Gonadakis of Ohio Right to Life said that activists learned that the most effective message they could use to win abortion bans was, quote, saving a baby with a beating heart. Even though they know that at 6 weeks there is no heart or neurological system, that what they're calling a heartbeat is an electrical pulse in a group of cells the size of a pencil tip. Gonadakis was quoted in the Times saying, "The power of words and repeating those words over and over again helps steer the debate and move the needle in your favor." Words like heartbeat, words like Holocaust, which they use to describe abortion, even words like 6 weeks pregnant, which includes 2 weeks before conception, 2 weeks before a person is pregnant. These are all lies that are harming and endangering women's bodies in this country right now. Lying is as old as Tzaraat and older. It's not going to stop in our lifetimes. People are going to use words to hurt other people for their own power and for their own control. That was true 3,000 years ago, and that is true now. But truth-telling is just as old. People have been telling the truth and seeking the truth and uncovering lies for 3,000 years and much more. What's different now is that the hierarchy of truth-telling has flattened and decentralized. The authority to speak truth and to be believed has moved outward and downward, away from official leaders to informal leaders, for good and for bad. From the President of the United States or the Governor of New York or members of Congress or religious leaders to people like you and you. You can influence a lot of people. You can influence hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people with what you say. You have the power to debunk lies. You have the power to tell truths that need to be told. You have the power to tell your own truths and to tell the truths of people you know and people you love. And this matters a great deal because the worst lies are the lies that get inside of us, that seep into us, that make us believe distorted, shaming things about ourselves. And we depend on each other to take those lies down and instead to tell nuanced, sometimes complex, sometimes vulnerable, whole truths. And this is why, despite the very real harm to very real bodies, despite the very real impact of repeated lies on collective consciousness, I know that we are still winning. Watch any movie from the 1980s and you will find it basically unwatchable because of the sexism and racism and homophobia that was normal then and is no longer now. Of course, racism, sexism, and homophobia continue to shape our world, but that is a measure of change. More people are out as LGBT and specifically as trans and non-binary than ever before. A 2019 Pew study showed that most Americans, even 59% of white Americans, understand that the legacy of slavery continues to shape the lives of Black people in America today. The book bans and the attacks on vulnerable groups will have an effect, but the battle for truth and reparations is going to be won. The 2022 midterms showed that Americans support abortion rights. It's going to be a long slog, but we're going to win back reproductive freedom. And this generation's absolute certainty about gender equality cannot be legislated or lied away. The prescription in Tazria-Metzora for a house inflicted with tzara'at is to take that house apart stone by stone by stone, removing every bit of wall that has decay upon it. The Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah says that when you remove all of the afflicted stones from the house, you will find a treasure inside. If all of these lies shaping our society right now force us to take apart old assumptions, challenge us to find the courage to stand in truth, and inspire us to use our words for healing and for good and for truth, we will have found a treasure indeed. Shabbat Shalom.